Imagine a 17-year-old girl with no military training, no noble blood, no weapon, walking up to the King of France and telling him, "God told me I should lead your army." Now imagine he actually said yes. And imagine she actually won. To understand this teenage girl, you have to go back to where it started, in a tiny, insignificant village on the edge of a war-torn village. This is the story of Joan of Arc. She is my confirmation saint, and I hope you enjoy her story. To understand Joan's story, you have to understand the mess that she was born into. It was 1420. France was in a 100-year-long losing war. The English have taken France. The king is hiding, and the country is exhausted. She was just a 13-year-old girl in a border town. She couldn't read or write. She spent her days spinning wool and tending to her father's animals. She was, by all accounts, completely ordinary. Until one afternoon, in her father's garden, Joan claimed the sky went bright and she heard voices. But it wasn't just any voice. It was the voices of St. Michael, St. Catherine, and St. Margaret. At first, they told her that she was a good girl and to keep going to church. As the war worsened, the messages became terrifyingly specific. They said, "Go to the king, rescue France, drive the English out." When Joan heard these voices, she took it as a call to action. Joan traveled to the nearby city, Vaudecourt, to ask the commander, Robert de Baudricourt, for an escort to the king. But of course, as a teenage girl trying to talk to a battle-hardened commander, saying, "God told me I needed to see the king to save France," it didn't go as well as she thought it would. Robert laughed in her face. He actually told her cousin to take her back home and get her ears boxed. He saw a delusional peasant girl. He did not see a saint. But here's the thing about Joan. She didn't leave. She actually stayed in the town for months. She told everyone who would listen the kingdom was in danger. She was consistent. She was loud. And eventually, people stopped laughing and started listening. Word started to spread. People in town began to believe in this girl wasn't crazy and she was the real deal. They actually got together and bought her a horse and a sword. But there was a problem. The journey to see the king was 300 miles through enemy-occupied territory. To survive the trip, Joan did something radical. She cut her hair and wore men's clothes, a tunic and armor, so that she could travel unnoticed as a soldier. She wasn't just a farm girl anymore. She was a 17-year-old traveler with a mission. Surprisingly, Robert de Baudricourt, the guy who laughed in her face, gave in. He gave her an escort and even gave her his own sword, saying, "Go and let come what may." So Joan travels 300 miles, survives enemy territory, and finally reaches the royal court of Chinon. But the King Charles VII is skeptical. He decides to play a game on her to see if she's the real deal. When Joan was called to the Great Hall, Charles isn't on the throne. He's dressed in regular clothes, hiding amongst the hundreds in the crowd. A different man is sitting in the royal chair, wearing the royal's robe. It was a trap. If she was a fraud, she would be kneeling to the wrong man. Joan walks in. She doesn't even look at the man on the throne. She walks straight through the crowd and finds the real Charles hiding in the back. She kneels before him. She tells him, "God gave you life, gentle king." Charles is stunned. He takes her aside and she whispers something in his ear. A secret only him and God would know. Whatever she said, it worked. The king was convinced, but leaving her was one thing. Handing over an entire French army to a 17-year-old girl is something different entirely. The king was convinced. but the rest of the French army, not so much. They are losing a war. They were tired, and now they were told to listen to a teenage girl who claimed to be hearing voices. But Joan didn't just sit in the back and watch. She was given her own suit of white armor and a banner with the names Jesus and Mary on it. The first mission was the Siege of Orleans, a city that has been surrounded by the English for months. If Orleans fell, France was finished. Joan didn't use typical military strategies. She was bold, and she led the charge. At one point, she got shot in the shoulder by an English arrow. Most people would have quit or went to the hospital tent. Not Joan. She just pulled the arrow out, prayed, and went back to battle. Her bravery was contagious. The French soldiers fought harder than they had the whole war. In just 4 days, the unbeatable English retreated. The Maid of Orleans had arrived, and suddenly, the impossible seemed possible. Joan did the impossible. She saw the king crowned. She saved Orleans. She changed the course of history. But as quickly as she rose in power, the tide turned. In 1430, Joan was captured and sold to the English. They couldn't admit that they had been beaten fairly by a teenage girl, so they put her on trial for heresy. They questioned her for months, trying to trip her up, but her faith never wavered. At just 19 years old, Joan of Arc was burnt at stake. Her final words shouted through the flames were, "Jesus." The church eventually cleared her name and declared her a saint. But I didn't just choose her as my confirmation saint because she's a warrior. I chose her because she's completely ordinary. She was a farm girl who couldn't read or write, but she had the courage to say yes when God told her to do something scary. She reminds me that you don't need a title or a ton of experience to make a difference. You just need the faith and the guts to keep going when everyone laughs at you. Thank you for watching the story of Joan of Arc. I'll see you in the next video.